You hit submit and then nothing. Weeks of silence, no status update, no idea who's looking at your file or what they are checking. So let me pull back the curtain and show you exactly what happens to your application the moment it leaves your hand. Because the way IRCC reads a file today is not the way it read one a few years ago. Hi, I'm Bella Lee, a regulated Canadian immigration consultant with Langille Immigration here in Nova Scotia. I help applicants who want one final comprehensive review of their application before they submit it, because once it's in, you don't get a second chance to fix it. And here's why this matters more now than it used to. IRCC is scrutinizing applications harder than ever, with tools that surface gaps and inconsistencies on every file inside your application and against everything you have ever submitted before. Things that slipped past a busy officer a few years ago get caught now. So if you understand how your file is actually processed and checked, you can build one that holds up to it. And if you prepared this application yourself, good for you. Plenty of people can. This is how you make sure the work holds. Let me walk you through every stage so you can see where the cracks open while you can still close them. The first thing that happens is automated and it takes seconds. It's called a completeness check. The system confirms every required field is filled, every fee is paid, and every required document is sitting in its slot. That's all it does at this stage. But miss one item, one form, one document, one signature, and your application is returned to you as incomplete. Not refused, returned, with weeks or months lost. So the first gate has nothing to do with how strong your case is, only whether it's complete. Then your file is triaged. IRCC uses a tool called Advanced Analytics to sort applications, to separate the routine ones from the complex ones. And this is the part people fear for the wrong reason. The system cannot refuse you. It can't even recommend a refusal. The most it can do is approve the eligibility on a clean routine file and move it forward. The moment anything looks complex, it does one thing. It routes your file to a human officer. And this is no longer just a temporary visa system. IRCC has confirmed it now runs on spousal sponsorship too, both inland and overseas. So the real question your file is being asked right here is simple. Do you read as routine or as someone who needs a closer look? Now, the name you've probably heard. Chinook. You may have seen it described as an AI that auto-rejects people. Well, it isn't. Chinook is a Microsoft Excel-based tool that sits on top of the main database, GCMS, the Global Case Management System. It pulls your information into one consolidated screen, so an officer sees your whole file at a glance instead of clicking through 20 different windows. It has no decision-making algorithm, and it was built mainly for temporary applications, visitor, study, and work permits. So, why does it matter to you? Because it tells you how an officer actually reads a file quickly on one screen from a summary. And when a person is reading fast from a consolidated view, the thing that jumps out at them is the inconsistency, the data that doesn't fit, the job title that doesn't match. Chinook doesn't decide anything, but it makes your contradictions easier to see. And whichever officer opens your file, here's what most people don't realize. They're not only reading what you submitted this time. The very first time you applied to Canada, a visitor visa, a study permit, anything, you were assigned a unique client identifier, your UCI, one number tied to you for life. Every application you have ever filed sits under it in that same database. So the officer reviewing your permanent residence application today can open the application you filed years ago. What you stated your occupation was, who you listed as family, where you said you lived. They can pull your entry and exit records from the Canada Border Services Agency, and under Section 16 of the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, you are legally required to answer every question truthfully and produce every document they ask for. It is not optional. You're never starting from a blank page. You're adding to a file that already records what you told them last time. So if your immigration history spans more than a couple of applications, or there's something in it you're not sure how to handle, don't guess. The link to book an application review is in the description. Because there's one more tool, and this is the one to respect. It's called the Integrity Trends Analysis Tool. It is anti-fraud machine learning, and IRCC put it into broad use in 2023. It mines your file for anomalies, an occupation that shifts between your applications, travel that doesn't line up, signs of a fraudulent document. It cannot refuse you. What it does is point a human officer straight at your file and tell them where to look. This is what people mean when they say scrutiny is up. It isn't that officers are harsher, it's that the system now flags automatically the exact inconsistencies that used to slip through simply because a human was busy. The margin for a quiet mistake is gone. So let me show you where that actually bites, and it's two places. The first is against your history. Years ago, you described your job in broad strokes, enough to show steady employment back home. Today, on your Express Entry profile, you describe that same job to fit the National Occupational Classification Code, the NOC code, your application depends on. To you is one job. To the file is two different accounts of the same years. The second place is inside this one application against itself. Your reference letter lists one set of duties. The NOC code you claimed implies another. Your work history says you left a job in March. Your travel history has you out of the country that whole spring. A few years ago, a rushed officer might have read straight past that. Now, something surfaces it before they even look. And it isn't only work. Take family. On an early application, you were asked to declare family members. You and your partner weren't married. Maybe you weren't even sure where it was going, so you left them off. Completely understandable. But if you've been living together for at least 1 year, you may have already met the definition of a common law partnership. So the day you go to sponsor that same partner, the file shows a relationship you once said wasn't there. A non-disclosed family member is one of the most serious mismatches there is, and it can affect your ability to bring that person to Canada later. Then a person makes the actual decision. Every approval, every refusal comes from an officer, reading your employment reference letters against the NOC you claimed, checking your certified translations, your medical exam, your relationship evidence. And if they find a problem, they usually don't refuse you outright. They send a letter, a procedural fairness letter, a PFL. It sets out exactly what concerns them and gives you one chance to respond, only 15 to 30 days. That response is not an apology. It's a case you have to build with evidence, and the burden is entirely on you. And the officer doesn't have to be certain. They decide on a balance of probabilities, more likely than not. That is low bar. Get it wrong, and if it becomes a finding of misrepresentation under Section 40, that's a 5-year inadmissibility. 5 years where you cannot even apply for permanent residence. It can pull in the family members on your application, and it stays on your file. So every application you ever make after is read with suspicion. Yes, people do overturn these at federal court on judicial review, but that is after the refusal, after retaining a lawyer, after a year or two that you did not have. So here's what all of this means for you. IRCC reviews applications more closely than it ever has, and it now has the tools to catch a gap or an inconsistency on every file, every time, against your history and against this application on its own. The honest truth is that what worked a few years ago may not survive the scrutiny your file gets today. And that is a real reason to understand how this machine works. Not to fear it, but to build for it. When you know how your file is read, triaged, cross-checked, and decided, you can prepare one that holds up at every step. You can make it bulletproof. But you can do that before you submit, because once it's in, you cannot pull it back. There's no, let me fix that. That's all a review is. I read your file the way an officer will, every field, every date, every document against itself and against your history before it goes in, and we close the gaps while we still can. You've done the hard part. If you want a second set of trained eyes before you submit, by all means, book an application review. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in my next video.